Hey there guys, we're taking a look at ARK Survival Evolved running on the AMD Ryzen 5500U. Now we're taking a look at it right now running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics settings, which actually set the in-game render resolution to slightly under 720p. This is just something that the lowest preset ends up doing to the game, and it's currently running with these settings, and the level of performance we're getting here at the stock 15 watt TDP is pretty rough, especially because those 1% lows are pretty brutal. If those 1% lows were way closer to those averages, it would be a somewhat playable experience, since 30 FPS is more than playable for a lot of people out there. But those 1% lows really make the experience of playing this extremely rough. This is just early on in the game, because this is not a game that I particularly enjoy myself, so I really couldn't get too far into it. But just from the early gameplay on here, it was very rough to play. Really, it's those 1% lows and those frame times that you see there that make the experience here just really rough to play in a lot of areas, especially as you start to do more things later on. It can get really heavy, and it just does not really feel like a good experience playing like this. And again, it's not actually running at 1080p, it's running at slightly under 720p right now. So seeing how rough the performance is here, we can of course try to do some things to maybe alleviate the problems that we have here. Really, some of the only things we can try to do is raise the TDP here to try to squeeze out some more performance. But of course, we can open up the APU tuning utility to try out the different presets. So starting off with the battery saver preset, you can see that with this preset, it is pretty much impossible to play. It really mostly just exists to make the default setting look somewhat reasonable. I mean, this is pretty much PowerPoint advanced happening here, you know? This is just not going to be an enjoyable experience, and overall, it's just not really something I would recommend. It's just here mostly just to show you what it's like at this preset, since I, always test out these presets now. So just putting it there, but yeah, don't play like this. Just don't bother. With that said, moving on to the actual presets that most people would end up using, here we have the balanced preset, which pretty much goes for a target of anywhere between 22 to 25 watts for TDP. It really is just all over the place. If it's just the CPU that's being used, it will go up all the way to 25, but when it's in a gaming workload like this, it really just hovers around the 22 watt area. And the level of performance that we're getting here is kind of rough. There were still moments of stutter where the frame rate would just drop to pretty much nothing, so it really was overall a very inconsistent experience, and it really didn't do much to improve the averages or anything like that to make this an actual playable experience. It really just felt just as rough to play as it did at the stock settings. And it starts to make sense when you really look at the fact that the GPU right now is not even being fully utilized. We are running at pretty much under 720p right now, so a lot of the load at this point is put onto the CPU, and the CPU really seems to be what's holding things back here. So this preset is just not going to realistically be doable for a lot of people in this game, because the game is just a little too demanding for this. And really, the biggest weakness of the 5500U is just the fact that its CPU is just not as good as a lot of modern CPUs are nowadays. And you'll see that even with the performance preset, which is not even really hitting that high of wattage compared to what we would normally see in other games, we're still not at 100% utilization of the GPU, and the CPU is now hitting some higher clock speeds. We're pretty much now hitting some pretty decent clocks, and you'll see that the averages actually end up going up and the 1% lows pick up a little bit, though it still doesn't get to any ranges that I would consider to be playable. But you will see that the frame time charts are a little more consistent than where we were at before. Again, still not a playable experience. This is still not going to be enjoyable for a lot of people. It's going to be rough. So it's not exactly a good experience, but you do see an uplift, and you can see what is the thing that is helping out the most here, and it's actually the CPU clocks. And it's why you'll see that when we have huge drops in clock speed, you will see the frame time charts start to just move up like crazy, because that is essentially the thing that is determining everything here, because the GPU itself is not even being fully utilized. So it's an interesting scenario where I feel like a lot of people that like this game would probably put up with this level of performance. It's just something that I don't personally understand, but it's because I don't like this game. I personally don't find it to be that fun, so I just don't really enjoy this level of performance in it at all. But I know that there are a lot of you that would see these numbers and just be like, you know what, screw it, I'm doing it. And I mean, more power to you, I guess. I personally don't get it, but it's your game, your system, play whatever you want on there. If If this is perfectly good for you, then go right ahead, have a blast. The one thing you can't say about this game is that it has no content. There is a lot of things to do in here. It's just most of it is not for me, but if this is your type of game, there is a lot here and this might be playable enough for you. The temperatures that we're reaching here aren't even that high to the point where I would be worried about the temps. So I mean, it's doable like this. Of course, that all depends on your ambient temperatures, so keep an eye on that. Don't cook your system to play ARK. Of all games, please don't cook your system to play ARK. And just for the fun of it, I pretty much dropped the in-game render resolution to the absolute lowest that it would go. So we're pretty much running at around 480p. And it is an experience. You know, the 1% lows are looking real nice. And those averages are pretty good. But nothing else on screen I would even remotely call as good, you know? I mean, it was just such a rough experience trying to just see anything like this, but I mean the FPS felt very smooth, you know, and you'll see we are hitting some pretty high temperatures now because the CPU is really going hard here. It's actually keeping a 4 gigahertz clock speed for a lot of the time, so it's really what's boosting a lot of the FPS here, because again, the GPU not being fully utilized, it's not even reaching its highest clock speeds because at this low of a resolution it really doesn't need to. The CPU is doing all of the work here, but my god, was the experience of playing like this pretty rough. But anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe. Again, I don't recommend playing this game on here, but I know some of you guys will, and I'll see you guys next time.